If you take a normal animal and drop it on an island, something weird starts to happen. Not right away, obviously, but give it a few 100,000 years, and suddenly the rules stop making sense. Big things shrink, small things explode, a rat becomes the size of a raccoon, an elephant becomes the size of a golden retriever. And I'm not talking about some fantasy novel here, this is actual biology, documented, peer-reviewed, and frankly kind of unhinged. It's called the island rule, and it's one of evolution's strangest experiments. Basically, when animals get isolated on islands with limited resources and reduced predation, natural selection goes off script. Large animals downsize to save energy. Small animals upsize to dominate available niches. The result? Islands that look like someone hit the randomize button on body size and just walked away. Elephants you could fit in your living room. Rats that could probably claim it. And between the extremes, an entire cast of creatures that seemed like they wandered out of a biology fever dream where the scale bar got drunk and forgot its job. Welcome to islands where evolution rewrites the rules. Enter at your own risk. And what happened on these islands will mess with everything you thought you knew about evolution itself. First, a rat the size of your dog. Still alive, still breeding. Welcome to Flores Island, where rodents have ambition, not fossil, current resident. The Flores Giant Rat, scientifically known as Papagomys armonvillei, measures up to 45 centimeters or about 18 inches long, not counting the tail. Add the tail, and you're looking at something nearly a meter in total length. That's roughly the size of a small raccoon. And it weighs about 2.5 kilograms or 5.5 pounds. To put that in perspective, your average city rat weighs maybe 300 grams. This thing is 8 times heavier. It lives in the montane forests of Flores, an Indonesian island that's become famous for producing biological absurdities. And the giant rat isn't even close to being the weirdest thing there, but we'll get to that. These rats evolved in an environment with few ground predators and abundant food sources, allowing them to bulk up without the usual evolutionary pressure to stay small and quick. Here's the unsettling part. They're not aggressive toward humans, but they're not exactly timid either. Local reports describe them as bold, sometimes entering villages to forage. And unlike their urban cousins, these rats are primarily herbivorous, feeding on vegetation, though they'll opportunistically eat just about anything. Additionally, Flores is home to multiple giant rat species. The woolly Flores Giant Rat, Papagomys theodorverhovmoni, is even larger in some specimens. These aren't evolutionary flukes, they're successful adaptations. The island had no native carnivorans until humans arrived, creating an ecological vacuum that rodents enthusiastically filled. And they're still evolving, still thriving, still getting bigger. If it got loose in your city, pest control would need a bigger boat. Most elephants try to be impressive. This one tried to fit through doorways, standing 3 feet tall, fully grown, economy-sized megafauna. Stegodon floresiensis, one of the dwarf elephants that lived on Flores Island until about 50,000 years ago, stood roughly 1.2 meters or about 4 feet at the shoulder. That's Shetland pony territory. For context, modern Asian elephants stand 2.5 to 3 meters tall. This thing was literally half the height. But here's where it gets interesting. Stegodon didn't start small. Its ancestors were full-sized mainland elephants that somehow made it to Flores, probably by swimming between islands during periods of lower sea level. And once they arrived, they hit an evolutionary wall. Islands have limited food, limited space, limited resources. Big bodies become liabilities. So over hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection favored smaller individuals who needed less food, could navigate dense forests more easily, and could sustain populations on limited resources. The result was an elephant that weighed maybe 300 to 400 kilograms, roughly the size of a large horse. Still hefty, but a fraction of their ancestors. These dwarf elephants shared Flores with an entire ecosystem of downsized and upsized creatures, including giant rats, giant storks, Komodo dragons, and something we'll discuss shortly that makes all of this even stranger. They browsed on vegetation, probably had few natural predators, and lived successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. But here's the plot twist. Fossil evidence suggests that Stegodon coexisted with early humans on Flores. Cut marks on bones indicate hunting or scavenging. These dwarf elephants, despite their reduced size, were still a significant food source. And their extinction roughly coincides with increased human activity on the island. The little elephant that could until it couldn't. Now, speaking of things that got smaller on Flores, we need to talk about the discovery that made paleontologists lose their minds in 2003. Because it wasn't just rats and elephants playing the shrinking game, humans did too. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit, stood about 1.1 meters or roughly 3 feet 6 inches tall. Adults, fully grown adults the height of a modern 7-year-old. Their brains were about 400 cubic centimeters, roughly a third the size of modern human brains. And yet they made stone tools, hunted, and survived on Flores for potentially hundreds of thousands of years. When the first skeleton was discovered in Liangboa Cave, the scientific community fractured into camps. Some argued it was a diseased modern human. Others said it was a distinct species that had undergone island dwarfism, just like the elephants. The debate was, to put it mildly, heated. Conferences got awkward, papers got vicious, but the evidence kept piling up. Multiple individuals, consistent morphology, stone tools, charred bones showing fire use, and perhaps most tellingly, they existed on an island already famous for producing dwarf elephants and giant rats. The island rule apparently applies to everyone, even us. These tiny humans hunted the dwarf elephants. They coexisted with giant rats and massive storks. And they persisted until at least 50,000 years ago, making them one of the last non-sapiens human species to exist. Their extinction timing suggests possible overlap with modern humans, though evidence of interaction remains elusive. The island made them small. They made it work anyway. If you thought Flores elephants were tiny, meet the record holder. Sicily's contribution to biological absurdity. An elephant the size of a sheepdog, heaviest specimen, 200 kilograms. The toy breed of megafauna. Paleoloxodon falconry lived on Sicily and Malta during the Pleistocene, and it represents the absolute extreme of island dwarfism in elephants. This creature stood only 90 centimeters or about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Some estimates put the smallest individuals even lower. Adult elephants that you could theoretically pick up if you were feeling ambitious and had no sense of self-preservation. To understand how absurd this is, consider that their ancestors were Paleoloxodon antiquus, straight-tusked elephants from mainland Europe that stood up to 4 meters or 13 feet tall and weighed 10,000 kilograms or more. These were the largest elephants that ever lived, and their island descendants ended up 90% smaller. The evolutionary pressure was intense. Sicily and Malta are small islands with limited vegetation. Large-bodied elephants would have exhausted resources quickly, so natural selection cranked the dial to minimum and kept it there. Smaller elephants need less food, reproduce faster, and can sustain larger populations on limited resources. But small size comes with trade-offs. Smaller brains, relatively speaking, reduced thermal efficiency, vulnerability to any predators that show up. And indeed, when humans arrived on these islands, the dwarf elephants didn't last long. Evidence suggests they were hunted extensively, their bones found in archaeological sites alongside human tools. Interestingly, multiple waves of elephant colonization hit these islands, and each time, the same thing happened. Big elephants arrived, small elephants evolved. Humans showed up, elephants disappeared. It's like watching the same evolutionary experiment run multiple times with identical results. Your lapdog is bigger than their apex herbivore. Most mice try to stay hidden. This one dominated an entire island, 12 inches long, built like a sausage. Rodent royalty of the Mediterranean. Hypnomized Morpheus, the Balearic Islands' giant dormouse, lived on Minorca and Mallorca until remarkably recently, going extinct only about 5,000 years ago. This wasn't a rat, it was a dormouse, which are typically tiny, adorable creatures. But island life turned this one into something else entirely. This dormouse grew to about 30 centimeters or 12 inches in body length, with some individuals even larger. It weighed up to 250 grams, making it one of the largest dormice ever recorded. And unlike typical dormice, which are arboreal and agile, Hypnomys was terrestrial and robust, with shortened limbs and a heavy build adapted for ground living. Why so big? because the Balearic Islands had no native mammalian predators. No foxes, no weasels, no wildcats. In the absence of threats, being large became advantageous. Larger dormice could dominate food resources, outcompete smaller rivals, and reproduce more successfully. The island rule in action, again. These giant dormice shared their islands with another endemic species, Myotragos, a bizarre dwarf goat antelope that also evolved into strangeness. Together, they represented an entire ecosystem of evolutionary oddities shaped by isolation. But then humans arrived. Neolithic settlers brought cats, dogs, and other invasive species. They also hunted and altered habitats. Archaeological sites show hypnomized bones in human refuse heaps. And within a few thousand years, the giant dormouse was gone. Another victim of the human expansion that has erased island endemics across the globe. Extinction timeline, rapid. Fossil record, cautionary. Now let's talk about the Channel Islands off California, because apparently islands everywhere were running the same evolutionary playbook. And on these islands, mammoths decided to participate in the shrinking contest. Mammuthus exilis, the pygmy mammoth of the Channel Islands, stood about 1.2 to 1.8 meters, or roughly 4 to 6 feet at the shoulder. Standard mammoths stood twice that height. These dwarf mammoths weighed between 200 and 750 kilograms, compared to the 6,000 to 8,000 kilograms of their mainland cousins. They evolved from Columbian mammoths that reached the islands during glacial periods, when sea levels dropped and the islands were closer to the mainland. But once isolated, the familiar pattern kicked in. Limited resources, no predators, and boom, shrinkage. What makes these mammoths particularly interesting is the timeline. They evolved their dwarf stature relatively quickly, possibly within 20,000 years. That's fast in evolutionary terms. It suggests that island dwarfism can happen rapidly when selective pressure is intense. Fossil evidence from the Channel Islands shows extensive mammoth remains, including well-preserved bones in caves and coastal deposits. These mammoths clearly thrived for thousands of years. They browsed on island vegetation, reproduced successfully, and adapted thoroughly to their isolated environment. Their extinction came about 13,000 years ago, roughly coinciding with the arrival of humans on the Channel Islands and climate changes that altered their habitat. Whether humans hunted them directly or simply disrupted their ecosystem remains debated, but the timing is suspicious. The last mammoths in North America weren't on the mainland. They were on islands, tiny and forgotten. While we're cataloging Flores absurdities, we should mention the giant marabou stork that stalked this island of biological chaos. Because if you're going to have tiny elephants and giant rats, you might as well throw in a carnivorous stork the size of a human. Leptoptilus robustus stood about 1.8 meters or nearly 6 feet tall. It had a massive beak, long legs, and a build suggesting it was a predator, not a scavenger. Fossil evidence places it on Flores alongside the dwarf elephants, giant rats, and yes, the Hobbit humans. This stork likely hunted the island's smaller fauna, juvenile rats, lizards, possibly even young Stegodon or human children if the opportunity presented itself. Large predatory birds have been known to take surprisingly large prey, and with limited mammalian predators on Flores, this stork probably filled an apex predator niche. The interesting evolutionary question is whether this represents island gigantism, the stork growing larger due to lack of competition, or if it simply retained a large size while other creatures shrank around it. Either way, it represents another data point in Flores' reputation as an evolutionary testing ground. It went extinct around the same time as the dwarf elephants, roughly 50,000 years ago. Whether humans hunted it, outcompeted it, or simply destroyed its habitat is unclear. Before we wrap up this evolutionary fever dream, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which of these island creatures you'd actually adopt, if you had to. So there you have it. Islands where the rulebook got shredded and biology just started improvising. Elephants the size of ponies, rats the size of cats, humans the size of children, and storks the size of nightmares, the island rule isn't really a rule. It's more like a suggestion that evolution takes and interprets based on local conditions. Limited resources? Shrink. No predators? Expand. Available niche? Fill it. And the result is a parade of biological absurdities that make perfect sense once you understand the constraints. But here's the sobering part. Almost every creature we've discussed is extinct. The dwarf elephant's gone. The giant dormice gone. The tiny humans gone. Island endemics are uniquely vulnerable to extinction because their populations are small, their range is limited, and their evolutionary adaptations highly specific. When humans arrive on islands, extinction tends to follow. We hunt, we introduce invasive species, we alter habitats, and we push endemic fauna past the breaking point. The Channel Islands lost their pygmy mammoths. The Mediterranean lost its dwarf elephants. Flores lost nearly everything except the rats, and even those are now threatened by habitat loss. The good news? We're finally starting to protect what's left. Island conservation efforts have ramped up globally, recognizing that these isolated ecosystems are both irreplaceable and fragile. The bad news? We're centuries too late to save most of what we've already destroyed. Islands were evolution's test labs. Turns out we were the final exam. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Dead Curious.